Kulumkal, good morning, good noon, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Learning, Rights, and Action session of 3 days Youth as Researchers on COVID-19 Knowledge Sharing Meeting on Addressing the Impacts of COVID-19 on Youth by UNESCO. My name is Chandra Tripura. I am an indigenous human rights activist from the Chittagong Hill Tracts of Bangladesh. I will be moderating this Asia-Pacific sub-regional knowledge sharing session. This knowledge sharing session event is part of the activities performed in the context of YAR signature program of UNESCO, which is a unique program of UNESCO led by SHS. The most amazing thing is that the program has made a record as the largest global youth-led research program of over 6,000 applications that has helped build the capacity of 270 young people from over 70 countries around the world. In today's particular knowledge sharing session, we will be hearing from the YAR Asia Pacific team members about their experiences and the impacts of COVID-19 on youth of Asia Pacific region. We all are going through this pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, which has profoundly impacted the lives of young people, particularly those from low socioeconomic stages and the young women who are often discriminated against, marginalized, and are at risk of violence and exploitations. This session is not only bring the opportunity to learn about the research work of the YAR team, but also bring the opportunity, enable all of us to interact with them and also to hear from the technical advisors about their comments on the research work. Today in this particular session, we will be having amazing 5-year teams and their representatives. We will have Salwa Mansoom, who will be representing the Asia Pacific region. We will be having Shibangi Mahra, who also we will be having Yurin Kubo and Astuti. We will be having Fispa. We will be having Fiz Fatima and Pauline Mandela as the young researchers. Also, we will be having 3 technical advisors with us in this amazing session. Ms. Lalasati Indrawagita, the Senior Officer, Education, Youth and Sports Division, Ashir Secretariat. We will be also having Mr. Adam Shar, Founder and CEO, Futurely. And we will also have Belinda with us, technical advisor, UNDP. Welcome everyone in this amazing session. I'm not gonna repeat what Jane has explained about the housekeeping role, but I will request again all the speakers, please unmute yourself while speaking and mute yourself while other speakers are speaking, and also keep your videos on. Without any further ado, I would like to request our first speaker, the most energetic teams from around the world who have been able to do this research work. For our session, we will be having 5 teams from the Asia Pacific regions, and our first speakers, I would like to request our first speakers, Ms. Salwa Mansoori, YAR team members on the team shifting to distance learning education system, a thorough study of COVID-19 impact on educational systems and the students in the Asia Pacific region. Salwa Mansoori, you have the floor. Please share about your exciting experience with us and about your team. How have you able to learn about the COVID-19 impact on our young people, particularly in your region? Thank you. Over to you, Salwa.
Thank you so much for that really kind introduction, and thank you everyone for joining in. A huge thank you to the UNESCO Youth as Researchers organizing team for organizing not just the knowledge sharing session, but everything behind that, including coordination, help with the research, project execution, planning, etc. So I'm incredibly grateful, and I speak on behalf of all my team members that the organizing team has been incredibly supportive. Without further ado, I would like to introduce my team members to you. We come from the Asia Pacific region, from different countries, and what has been absolutely incredible is the opportunity to research with fellow team members that come from all across the world and all across different parts of the region. These fellow team members of mine have been absolutely incredible in not just doing the entire research project virtually, but also being enthusiastic to put their own inputs forward, as well as coordinating things, producing presentations. So a huge shout out to each and every team member, as well as Miss Arishka, who is our team leader and who has been coordinating the learning team on behalf of UNESCO. Next slide, please. So our research question, even though the broad aspect focuses on the impact of COVID-19 on learning systems as a whole, we have chosen few specific areas that we have not only observed, but read in through literature reviews and read in scholarly published work. And our research question therefore focuses on the way in which COVID-19 has impacted learning abilities, transition from previous institutions to forthcoming institutions, such as undergraduate to postgraduate ones, the provision of finance and accessibility of financial support, and the overall well-being of undergraduate and graduate students in the Asia Pacific region. So these were specific topics and themes that we focused on based on the research we conducted and based on the inconsistencies we found in previous literature that had not been covered before. Next slide, please. So some of the research questions that we did focus more specifically on was, how do the students of the Asia Pacific region cope up with the distance learning education system? How do they address the adversaries for the lack of proper logistics in an environment in order to attend their prescribed curriculum? So in particular, the second question, as well as the first question, really focuses on the online aspect of how connected learning has transformed because of the pandemic, noting that the Asia Pacific region in particular, relative to the global north and relative to the rest of the world, has a greater digital divide. And therefore, how can we bridge this digital divide specifically with populations from marginalized communities who are already left behind before the pandemic? The third aspect that we focused on was, how do overseas citizens who are considered to be foreign students maintaining their overseas curriculum and research from home due to travel restrictions? And this really stems from some of our personal experiences of being international students in universities and studying through a connected but online learning mechanism that makes it even more difficult to gauge understanding of certain topics that are better learned and better understood in person. Next slide, please. So our motivation to study has really stemmed from our personal experiences as students in the Asia Pacific region. So we have stemmed our motivation from understanding how learning has been impacted by our personal experience, such as disruption of learning through the lack of appropriate platforms or softwares that we haven't had access to, lack of appropriate resources, such as lack of access to libraries or resources that are not available through an online version, as well as just the uncertainty and disrupted mental health. When we were looking for our motivation to actually conduct the research, we had the opportunity to go over a different topics of the UNESCO Youth as Researchers program, such as mental health and technology. And this actually highlighted to us how interconnected each and every aspect of the Youth as Researchers program is, and how interconnected and globalized the world has become. And this only motivates us further to address some of the most pressing problems that we see emerge in the education context. So even though we were focusing on education and learning, we learned a lot about mental health and about technology as we were conducting our research. Next slide, please. So in terms of the research methodology and analysis, we conducted relevant mixed method research studies. So there was qualitative as well as quantitative information that was collected. There was solely focus, there was solely focus on the quantitative aspect, but we were planning on conducting qualitative research as well. However, some of that was hampered due to the pandemic and due to the uncertainty as the crisis was unfolding. So we heavily relied on quantitative methods. We used statistical techniques and language processing models to be able to do that. The data we analyzed was through robust analytical platforms, and all the data was transformed into quantifiable structures. The correlations are addressed accordingly from the analysis, and recommendations were drawn from the data-driven process. So the primary form of research methodology that we did use was survey research. Initially, we wanted to extend this sort of survey research into conducting full-time interviews, but we did not have the opportunity to conduct those full-time interviews. So instead, we relied heavily on survey research. Survey research was allowed us to collect necessary information, not just in terms of in terms of rankings. So we just did not collect research in terms of on a scale of 1 to 10 rate how much your learning has been disrupted, but we also asked questions such as to what extent your learning was disrupted, or asked students as well as any survey respondents for that matter to respond in qualitative and writing terms what that disruption really meant to them, because this allowed us to gauge more depth rather than simply rely on rankings and numbers to be able to do that. So this was a great opportunity for us to understand why certain research methods work, why certain research methods don't. It was also an opportunity for us to eliminate certain research methods that we initially thought would be useful, but were not feasible enough in a online setting to really be implemented. Next slide, please. So some of the key findings that we did have was that the lockdown, the college has caused a lot of stress and anxiety among students. As evident as and unfortunate it is that mental health is deteriorating due to the pandemic, we also realized that direct link with the shutdown of in-person interaction and in-person classes that students often did not have the opportunity to access. So they missed out on crucial personal and human interaction and social time that they had with their peers, colleagues, and teachers that would uplift their sense of learning, definitely, but also uplift social interaction and overall well-being. We found that there was a strong correlation between the environment and internet connectivity. So where a person was originally based or which part of the Asia Pacific region the student came from heavily impacted the extent to which they were able to connect effectively to the internet and thus get the most out of learning. This has allowed us to understand the digital divide is not just between the global south and the global north, or does not have specific distinctions between certain countries, but in fact, even within the same country, the extent to which certain people have had the opportunity to access digital platforms as opposed to others or receive a higher, more stable internet connection is a necessary consideration. We also realized that 33% of students missed exams due to network problems or accessory shortages. So this goes back to the aspect that I initially spoke about, which was that some regions as well as some socioeconomic classes and students coming from certain socioeconomic backgrounds did not have the same opportunity and did not have the same access to internet connection, and thus they were not able to perform to their full academic potential. We also noted that 63% of students expressed delayed semester or graduation, and this greatly impacted their future plans of action in terms of attending grad school or in graduate school, or in terms of understanding where they stand in their academics so that they're able to make necessary learning changes to their schedules as well as learning styles. So all of which impacts any sort of future planning and even adds to that stress and anxiety that we initially found. Next slide, please. So we have also divided our key findings in terms of undergraduate and graduate students. For undergraduate students, there has been a strong relation on the range of the smoothness to the effectiveness of the strong relation in the range of smoothness up to the effectiveness on online learning. So the extent to which undergraduate students had a smooth and effective um, online learning experience has been greatly impacted. We also found that participants were forced to exert effort to attend the necessary needs to cope with the changes the pandemic entailed to the experiences. So there were a lot of personal amendments as well that on a personal level changes that had to be made that greatly impacted the extent to which undergraduate students were able to reach their academic potential. There were local responses as well as environmental changes that affect the transition of students in distance education. So this is something that is very relative from one region to another, not just based on digital connectivity, but the overall environment in which these technological provisions are readily available. Students acquire devices to immediately adopt changes brought by COVID-19. So the best effective way that we've said is to acquire different devices that suit the needs of students. And essentially, this is far to do with internet connectivity. This is to ensure even students with different needs and disabilities that need to be catered to. So any sort of new provision that they devised that they initially had access to perhaps during their in-person classes, they wouldn't have had access to that if they were at home and since they were away from school. So things like these and devices like these are something that schools need to focus on because these devices are not as readily available or not affordable that the school otherwise provides to them in an in-person setting. Next slide, please. So students in postgraduate courses, there was a weak relation on the rate of internet connectivity and the effectiveness of online classes. This largely stems from the fact that postgraduate study could largely be research based. So they wouldn't necessarily require as many in-person synchronous, online synchronous classes that that their course relies heavily on. It was majorly to do with coursework and independent study, and therefore that explains the weak correlation between this. It is particularly important to aid the needs of even postgraduate students, often who are stereotyped to have independent work and research. They still need to be reached out to for postgraduate support. And considering the pandemic, a lot of their field work is hampered, which means that they need to adapt a lot of their research methods themselves to an online learning. So help with that is particularly useful. Um, this stems from the fact that a drop on the interaction with their advisors or supervisors was recorded, which meant that a lot of students did not get as much time, postgraduate students did not get as much time as they would have otherwise with their supervisors for directed research and for also being able to lift to their full academic and research potential in a postgraduate degree. A postgraduate degrees, largely including PhDs, for example, tend to involve a lot of independent work compared to undergraduate. And therefore, we'd highly recommend increased contact hours with advisors so that postgraduate students feel more confident in being able to conduct research independently, learn independently, but also know that they have support available. Productivity was heavily affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. And this specifically stems from the fact that different students come from different backgrounds and different families. And they have several families have been impacted greatly economically and personally, as well as emotionally by the pandemic. And this has impacted their ability to perform to their full academic standard. So some of the key recommendations that we do propose are in the following slides. Next slide, please. In terms of students who are planning to take higher studies, half of these participants in this category will be taking a gap year, which means that instead of going directly to postgraduate studies or for undergraduate studies, there has been a great focus on the need to take a gap year as well. So this finding makes us realize the need that students and the roles that teachers have towards making sure that gap years of students help them recover personally, but also prepare them for the following academic year. In terms of financial management and family and work, it affects their prioritization in taking up higher studies. Due to the impact that the pandemic has had on the economy, several students may choose to take up working as opposed to continuing with higher education. And it is necessary for schools to support this transition and to make them know that they are still able to fulfill their academic goals despite having a few years off, or despite changing their paths to receiving those academic goals, even if those are delayed. So support by career counselors to make that sense of reassurance and let them know that it is absolutely okay to take a few years off before they start the next phase of their academic journey is necessary, as students can tend to become anxious about missing out on degrees that they wanted to take. Childhood responsibilities of the participants were influential in the prioritization of their goals to higher studies. This largely focuses on the need for women in terms of catering to their needs so that they're able to not have to choose between their academic and professional careers and family and childcare. This also largely depends on the fact that since everyone was working from home and a lot of work from home policies were put in place, women were supported to ensure that they were able to focus on their careers as well as their family life while being at home. Next slide, please. Students who are challenged to continue their studies, 70% of those who are not enrolled as a student will tend to discontinue their studies. 50% of the participants cited financial constraints as a factor to reconsider their plans for studying, and 60% of participants will neither pursue their studies even if given the opportunity outside of their locality. So these numbers are particularly important in highlighting that given the opportunity and given financial support, students are quite willing to pursue higher education, are willing to study further. And therefore, it's very necessary for financial support, both from undergraduate as well as graduate institutions. This could be in terms of fee reductions, or this could be in terms of additional need-based and merit-based financial support and scholarships, which prevent students from dropping out. Next slide, please. So the factors affecting the adaptation of the participants to distance education can be summarized through this. Participants noted financial constraints, availability of support to learning needs, very little career support, availability of scholarship and fellowship opportunities, availability of appropriate network connectivity, and environmental changes, as well as familial factors due to COVID-19. Next slide, please. In terms of analysis of the findings, we saw that situations in the localities and their COVID-19 response were crucial in the adaptability of participants, particularly the required shift in education. Immediate changes in lifestyle and updating of resources can help ease the effect of COVID-19 pandemic on the effectiveness of education. Although there are solutions that are needed to be planned on a long-term basis, such as internet connection, availability of resources, equipment, and devices, we believe that higher education institutes play a very crucial role in ensuring that transition of undergraduate students to their further career goals is smooth. In terms of situations, the localities, we understand that different communities have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, either due to their personal identity or because of their socioeconomic background. So these factors need to be considered, that some communities did not have as efficient as COVID-19 responses as others. And therefore, there are local level factors which highlight the need for different actors in the international community, such as local level grassroots actors, as well as international organizations, as well as higher education institutes, in fostering inclusive and distance learning. Next slide, please. What we also saw that interactions with peers and professors was impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, but more so was the availability of resources that students would otherwise learn through. So some majors and some courses don't heavily rely on textbooks or predetermined reading material. A lot of it is dependent on seminar style questions or interactions with other peers, which help them better understand certain concepts and foster peer learning in a monumental manner. So essentially what our findings focused on was that there was a greater need for these interactions to take place even in an online setting. So even through buddy groups or reading groups, we highlight how these initiatives could help acquire the necessary resources as well as build networks to gauge funding from either the alum community, crowdfunding, or other resources that the student community could help access. Next slide, please. So priorities, as we've mentioned, have changed for those that have been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Instead of schools simply focusing on education and learning, they should focus on the overall development of the student as a whole, including whether they're able to manage their finances well enough, whether there's enough support provided to them to understand the importance of mental health, and whether they have enough counseling and support to highlight and provide an outlet from their personal lives to talk about the things that impact them in their personal lives and hence impact their academic and professional potential. So this may include counseling services in schools or robust building of social networks between the alum community as well as the student community. For many students, there's an opportunity for them to use their professional life as an outlet to discuss some of the aspects that impact them. Next slide, please. As we've mentioned before, some of these are key recommendations that we've already highlighted in higher education institutes and the role they play. Next slide, please. In terms of limitations or suggestions, we've realized that our methodology can have great limitations as well as the area of focus. This project has been running for roughly 10 months now, but we know that there's opportunity for further research in a comparative context as well as different countries of the Asia Pacific region. Next slide, please. I have covered this in the previous few slides. Next slide, please. Thank you so much for your time and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Salwa. That was really amazing to know about the, you know, yeah, thank you so much, Salwa, for the overview on your research, your team's work. I think all of us already, you know, get a a brief overview about the youth situation in the Asia Pacific region, how they have been they had to go through overall due to the COVID situation. Thank you so much for your efforts and for joining us today. We will now move to our next speaker. Our next speaker is representing the East Asia and Australia team, Ms. Yurin Kubo. She will be representing the team East Asia and Australia on the transitioning to online platform, how COVID-19 restriction affects higher education students and learning. Over to you, Ms. Kubo.
Hey, thank you for introduction. Good morning, everyone, and good evening, everyone. It's an honor for me to be here representing my team, East Asia and Australia Pacific team, sharing briefly about our findings on transitioning to online platform. Is the presentation up already? Can I just double check? Thank you. Great. So yeah, to share briefly about our findings on transitioning to online platform, how COVID-19 affects higher education students' learning. So can you move to the next slide? Great, thank you. So this is our team coming from 6 different countries: Indonesia, Mongolia, Malaysia, China, South Korea, and Japan. And I'm Yuri, representing Japan in this research. So our team had a wide range of expertise such as medicine, public health, psychology, international development, and education. And we're also at different life stages, with some of us were recent graduates, while others have nearly 10 years of work experiences. So this diversity worked really well for us to work collaboratively and share different insights to develop and conduct our research. And moving on to our research question and rationale, we had a main research question, which was how COVID-19 restrictions affect higher education institutions' learning in East Asia and Australia. I will refer to higher education institution as HEIs during this presentation. So while this research question sounds rather broad, we actually had several specific focuses. So first focus was on the sudden transition to online learning, so-called emergency remote teaching in the literature. So hereafter I'll call it ERT. We also focused on challenges and support on this theme. So when we tried to understand how COVID-19 restrictions affected students, we specifically considered challenges as well as support availability and needs from students' perspectives. And when looking at these variables, we also took a holistic approach by exploring both academic and non-academic factors. And rationale behind this was that the many research in existing literature focused on specific issues such as academic, were critiquing on instructional problems and calling for improvements in teachers. And we were also motivated to choose this topic since half of the team experienced ERT personally and struggled with online learning challenges. This was something we wanted to explore further to amplify students' voice. Last but not least, we focused on 5 countries of Australia, China, Japan, Mongolia, and South Korea, because there was uneven research attention to particular countries such as Mongolia and Japan were quite underrepresented in the research, so we wanted to fill this gap. To introduce our research design, our research collected quantitative data from 327 eligible participants using online surveys, which was analyzed using YAR packages. And our questions try to understand participants' experience during the ERT, not only from academic focus, but non-academic focus, such as learning environments, physical and psychological well-being. And majority of our participants were or has been studying in Mongolia, and the rest are spread almost evenly from Japan, South Korea, Australia, and China. To share briefly more detailed demographic information of our participants, more than half of the participants are female, aged between 18 to 24 years old. The majority are undergraduate students, and also more than 70% of them were domestic students within their education institutions. So turning to our findings, our preliminary findings from our survey suggested that around 80% of the participants were facing challenges during their ERT. These challenges were not limited to academic, but also psychological, physical, environmental, and technological. So academically, around 1/3 of the participants reported that ERT resulted in heavier workload, with some elaborating that they had to learn using the e-learning tools on top of studying, or attend both pre-recorded and live seminars alongside intensified assignments. And campus closure also limited students' opportunity to practice their skills through practicum or lab activities. And psychologically, more than half the students reported feeling disconnected from their peers and teachers. Almost half were less motivated during online learning, as well as some reported their struggles with concentration and procrastination. And furthermore, some students reported experience eye fatigue due to prolonged hours facing computers. So other challenges, can you move to the next slide, please? And other challenges reported are related with online learning environments, such as lack of personal space to study at home, and technological related challenges such as software malfunction and limited internet service, which role became significant during online learning. Our research also found that international students experience more challenges compared to their domestic counterparts. In average, they significantly experience one more challenge in average. Oh, I don't know why. Sorry about the slide, it's in the wrong direction, but Our research also found, moving to the findings surrounding student support, our research identified that most type of support was not readily accessible to students. We presented 14 types of student support in our survey, which variable were agreed upon our pilot questionnaire findings. And most of the variables were accessed by less than 20% of the students. And least accessible kinds of support was concerning financial issues such as installment arrangements or tuition payments, reduction in tuition fees, and other financial aids. And what was interesting and significant then was that students generally had negative views towards supportiveness of their schools, as you can see from this pie chart. Approximately 70% of the students either said their school are not helpful at all or just slightly helpful in trying to engage with online learning in difficult situation. So these findings are concerning student support availability, and students' views on students' helpfulness suggest that the students' experiences during COVID-19 were arguably quite negative. Looking further into student support needs, next slide, please. Okay, our findings show that the students are calling for support not only from their higher education institutions, but also outside their HEIs to handle such a difficult situation and to engage better in their online learning. One of the significant needs addressed to HEIs was the reduction in tuition fees and other academic related supports, such as strengthened access to learning resources and formative feedback on the assignments. Regarding support needs outside their schools, access to internet service were high, with 61.8% calling for it. One of the key and interesting finding is that over 40% of the students expressed needs for support for food, such as vouchers for groceries and food banks. This is significant because it suggested intensified financial burdens on students, in which students potentially face some difficulties in securing funds for foods. This is important to consider, as students, human beings in general, needs enough nutrition to get their brains working. So finally, we would like to introduce some of our key recommendations we drew from our findings. First, HEIs are recommended to conduct the student needs assessment to provide support for direct and indirect challenges affecting their learning. This recommendation stems from our findings that students' needs and perspectives are very mixed and diverse, suggesting the importance of investigating context-specific needs. Second, we recommend the HEIs collaborate with the relevant stakeholders to grant financial leniency for tuition fees through different means to ease the intensified financial burden during COVID-19. The third, we recommend HEIs to partner with the relevant stakeholders to develop alternative ways to supplement the limited learning resources vital for students' learning. As an unprecedented event, the pandemic forced many institutions to adapt to and change the way they conduct their activities, including higher education institutions. This study shows the value of listening to the beneficiaries, in this case, the student's voice, as it can help not only for the institutions to navigate ways to improve the ERT and support their students, but also to empower students to participate in developing better and more inclusive post-pandemic education system. So this is the end of our presentations, and we would like to extend our gratitude for the opportunity to conduct this research, as well as to build friendship with like-minded young researchers during these difficult times. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuria, for your wonderful presentation. And I would like to thank both of you, actually, our two presenters, for sharing your research experiences with all of us. Now, I would like to request our technical advisors for their opinions. As I already mentioned, that we have joined by three amazing technical advisors with us today in this session. We have Ms. Larasati Indrawagita, who has over 10 years professional experience as an expert in government programs, policy analysis, and program planning, monitoring, and evaluations. I think she will be able to, bring so many things and give opinion on our, presenters' presentations for their research work. First of all, I would like to request Ms. Lala to, give your opinion on our two presenters' research works. Over to you, Ms. Lala.
Okay, thank you so much, Chandra, for the introduction, and also to Salwa's team as well as Yuria's team for the wonderful presentations, and also for the hard work in performing those research studies. I know that it's not an easy task at all, especially during the situation. So just a very quick introduction to give you some context. As mentioned earlier, my name is Lala. I'm working at the ASEAN Secretariat. So if you're not familiar with this association, it's basically a group of Southeast Asian countries. Brunei Darussalam, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos PDR, Malaysia, Myanmar, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. So this is an intergovernmental organization, and there are plenty of cooperation platforms under this organization, including education, youth development, and also sports, labor sector, science and technology, and so on and so forth. So based on my experience, and also through the perspective of youth development and inter-regional cooperation, I would like to share a few ideas and perhaps some points that might be useful for you in further enhancing the recommendations that you already prepared, which are already good. And now I can see that, although in my case, there are only 10 countries, but basically the issues that we're facing globally are quite similar in terms of, complex environment and distractions at home, lack of social interactions and connection among teachers and students. So to keep my feedback short and sweet, I just like to divide this idea into two big chunks of issues. Yeah, the first one is intergenerational gap, and the second one is public-private partnership. So the first one, intergenerational gap. So I see lots of interesting findings here, especially when it comes to, investing more in students' needs and also addressing the concerns of the students and learners. And we might miss something here a little bit, particularly about training and capacity building program for educators and trainers. Because at the end of the day, what you will be receiving, the knowledge, the skills that you're trying to develop, everything will come from the leadership of the teachers, of the lecturers, right? And the trainers. So this is something that perhaps you can also consider to be included in your recommendation, especially for its relevance to your findings here. Like, maybe, the teachers and educators, they're also facing the same issues like the students. They have to adapt with the whole situation, not being able to teach in person, not being able to interact directly with the students. So we're trying to see from multiple perspectives. So perhaps that's something to think about. Maybe if you can explore more on how to develop better capacities among the teachers and the lecturers in terms of finding out what would be the best study plans for their students, how to deal with the mental health of the students, because it relates to productivity, of course, as mentioned earlier, whether the student prefers to work in groups or they would prefer doing things by themselves, because I think it was also raised that there's no one approach that will suit the needs of everyone. So that's something that a teacher or an educator should also know to deal with this whole situation, especially on the well-being and mental health of their students. And then how to create interactive methods, because talking about intergenerational gaps, we also talk about the lack of capacity in some of, if not most of, the educators. They might not be familiar with platforms, like Mentimeters or other survey platforms that will make their online classes more engaging for the students, and also how to encourage the students to get access to open source materials sometimes the higher education institutions and training institutions will focus on their own programs, their own resources. While actually out there are plenty of open access resources that can also be shared with their respective students and learners, just by sharing the links, encouraging them to look into those open sources and then discuss them during class. That will be something that's an educator should know how to do it in this era. So the first thing that I'd like to highlight is training and capacity building program for educators. And yeah, perhaps Chandra, should I stop there and allow for some
thank you
discussion,
so much, Lala. Maybe
okay.
Later we can add again.
Okay, I'll address the second one later then. Okay.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. Thank you. I believe that our presenters, our young researchers, will be able to learn more, and then will be able to enrich their research studies from all of your comments. I would like to invite our next technical advisors, Mr. Adam Sherp, who is a futurist, I would say, and a meaningful youth engagement specialist. I invite you now to give your comment on our two research presentations. Over to you, Adam.
Okay, Chandra, thank you so much. And a big thank you to all of you for being here, especially to Salwa and Yuria for your fantastic presentations. And I think one of the most compelling things about this whole event is that as young people, your findings resonate particularly with you because you felt these impacts yourselves. And I think that makes the research all the more compelling, but it also is a testament to you because you went through the same challenges, many of you, and you used that to fuel a fire to do research and to learn more about these topics and issues and to raise awareness and create change. That's unique. That shows leadership, and it needs to be, it really should be rewarded. So well done to all of you. So again, just so you know, even though I don't have much time here, I will be hanging out with you after this program. So if you have other questions, you want to talk more, if I didn't go into enough detail, let's talk later. Okay, so this is just the beginning, not the end. Okay, what will I say? In the short time that I have, again, thank you, Lala, for sharing your insights there. I agree with everything you said. A couple of the themes for me, I think one is the importance in your research of surfacing the demographics more than, say, your presentations did. I think that will add, richness and depth, and also do justice to some of the, rather than treating all young people as a homogenous group, we want to surface the unique experiences of specific young people coming from different backgrounds. So I'd say that's one thing. And the second thing is, again, in a similar vein, how does your research surface youth voices and tell stories in a compelling way so your research grabs attention? I personally didn't see enough of young people with their pictures and with their quotes and their individual stories. The quantitative data, I understand that COVID had some impact on some of your research methods, which meant you had to focus on quantitative methods like a survey. I understand that, but we should strive to add color and depth to our research so we can capture attention and also give young people the platform that their voices deserve so they don't get lost. So let me go specifically into the presentations. Salwa, excellent presentation. You're so articulate. I was not as articulate as you are at your age, let me tell you. A few things. One, you said at the beginning of your research, one of your key research areas was looking at the experience of international students. I thought that was interesting. Again, that's a unique experience through COVID of international students who have traveled to a new country and are now restricted, unable to leave and experience the social interactions. I felt like their experience was lost in your recommendations and in the research itself. I was excited to learn about their individual experience. I didn't feel like we got that. And I felt like one of the most compelling one of the most compelling things to come out of your research was the level of dropouts, like very high dropout rates. And I think that that's a compelling research question to explore further. the writing is on the wall for universities, everyone. The universities were already in decline, and already discussion is thinking in the next 10, 20, 30 years, will we even have universities anymore? Or will they be replaced by a new sort of Uber of education where, you know, courses are less laborious, less expensive? There are lots of new ideas here. And I think, what are the impacts of dropouts going to be on their access to work and employment? These are really interesting, deeper research questions that you could explore on the back of this initial study. But well done. And I just want to say, Yuria, I was really impressed with your group's clarity in your research. It's a shame that your slides went to portrait rather than landscape. That was unfair on you, because I read the brief before this session, and I was impressed by the clarity of your presentation, the fact that you had clear research objectives, and I think you met them by and large. And I was just impressed with how you added caveats where they were needed. Like, for example, we know that there are limitations in our research methodology, and so deeper study is needed to acknowledge the unique experiences of different demographic groups. You know, I just thought, I thought you really deserved to be commended there. Again, more demographic data. And you mentioned that studying Mongolia was unique. We didn't hear the unique experience of Mongolian students in universities. So that uniqueness was kind of lost, I'm afraid. But I've gone over time. We can carry on talking after this session. Well done, both groups.
Thank you so much, Adam. That was really, really important, I would say. Please, all our YAR members, please note carefully all our, recommendations or comments from the technical advisors. Now, I'd like to move to our next technical advisor, Ms. Belinda Latswai. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I know that you are very, engaged with the young entrepreneurs, because you are part of the Youth Collab, and which is actually the Foster Youth Entrepreneurs, the largest youth platform for all the youth entrepreneurs. And being an entrepreneur, I am really very happy to have you in this session. Thank you so much for joining us. And now I would like to request you to give your comments for our two presenters. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Chandra. I think really, again, I mean, I don't want to, it can't be said enough, really phenomenal presentations, really amazing work. So I think I don't want to repeat anything that has already been said by Lala and Adam, but what I'll say is what I was truly impressed by, also coming from an M&E background, was the data collection methods, right? So you used very innovative tools. And I really wanted to hear a little bit. I wanted to hear more, but I was in two minds to think, is it because I like data, or is it because it's relevant to the story? But I think as Adam was speaking, it also dawned on me that actually I wanted to hear more, specifically because of those unique experiences. I think Sawa, you mentioned that, women or young women at universities have this additional childcare burden, right? And there's not enough supports given in that space. But it was sort of mentioned, and then I really wanted to hear more. How does that look like? I mean, what further support is needed? I mean, like more practically. That I think that for me, I was like, I just wanted to go a bit deeper into the intersectional experiences of these young people. So international students, young women, young men, what are the impacts on social cohesion? I mean, you really can go further and further into this, but I think it's, given how innovative your tools were, it's really great. I mean, I'm sure you also have that data to then kind of dig deeper and to put that in your recommendations and let that shine through. I mean, all that hard work has to shine through. And I think my second comment, and I'll be very brief, for Yuria, the group presentation. Again, the clarity was great. I liked hearing that. And I think what your presentation really showed was actually both, in fact, is that there's this line of, this mental health impact that keeps tying a lot of our discussions together. But we keep framing it in this broader thing, mental health, non-mental health issues. Let's dig deeper into that. What does that mean? You intimated, disconnection, isolation, social isolation. These are very, very key issues in development that we need to know of. They have macro level implications as well. So would really have loved to see just a little bit more of that in your presentation. And I can go on forever, but I will not. So I'll just pass on to Chandra. And again, welcome anyone to send me questions, comments, anytime. I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Belinda. Thank you, all our three technical advisors for your comments. I will get back to you later. Again, now I would like to move to our next presentations. We still have three more presentations from our three YAR team members. Now I'd like to move to Shivangi Mehra, YAR team from South Asia. They will be presenting on the youth volunteering experiences during the COVID-19 pandemic in South Asia. Over to you, Shivangi.
Thank you, Chandra. Greetings to all. I'm Shivangi Mehra from New Delhi, India. I will be speaking on behalf of the South Asia team. Our research topic is experience of youth volunteers during the COVID-19 pandemic in South Asia, where we focused on identifying some key objectives linked to youth taking actions through volunteering and have tried to suggest recommendations based on our findings. To begin with, I think the clicker is not working. Yeah. So to begin with, I would like to introduce you to our team. We have Dr. Ali Tala from Pakistan, Khadija Ehsan from Bangladesh, Arya Mananda from Nepal, and Nadine Vedvriti and I are from India. So talking about our motivation, now since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic worldwide, volunteers have been acting in response to it by taking multiple roles as frontliners in the communities and showing strength of solidarity. Now, while youth volunteers take action, it is essential to know how their volunteering experiences impacted them. Often, volunteers in these circumstances go through extreme difficulties, stress, experience and witness the loss of lives and get psychologically impacted. So in these circumstances, it is important to have policies and laws that can ensure the well-being and safety of volunteers and strengthen their initiatives. And our motivation behind selecting this topic has been our own personal experiences in terms of serving our countries as volunteers in different capacities. And through this incredible platform provided to us by UNESCO YAR team, we got the opportunity to connect with like-minded people from different countries, share common problems, and identify possible solutions together. And through this platform, we wanted to advocate about youth inclusion, volunteerism, gender equality, and mental health, and provide some regional quality data to support future studies in this area. Now, talking about objectives, now to answer what has been the experience of youth volunteers, we identified 6 objectives to focus on, which were divided among 6 members of the team to explore. First one being incentives and motivations that influence young people's desire to volunteer. Second has been how volunteer aids to skill and capacity development. Third, discovering different volunteer actions taken by youth during the pandemic. Fourth was assessing mental health, emotional and physical well-being of youth volunteers. Fifth was to recognize the barriers faced by volunteers. And lastly, to understand the inclusion of youth in the pandemic preparedness and response. Now, to make this study possible, we adapted quantitative research methodology as soon as our research proposal was approved by the YAR Ethics Committee linked to our Our online survey included some general questionnaires and questions directly linked to our key objectives. Now, the survey was shared through emails, YAR website, and social media was used to amplify its maximum reach. Volunteering organizations were also reached out for the purpose. And over 2 months, we received around 522 responses from 4 countries, that is India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Nepal. And then data was analyzed and results were discussed by the team through the weekly virtual meetings. Now, talking about the key findings, looking at our first objective, that is the motivations, we group the motivations in 3 categories, that is career, value-driven, and social. And we'll be sharing just few of the findings as we are running low on time. So around 75.4% volunteers were primarily driven by humanitarian and altruistic motives, but also a similar number had the desire to enhance their career perspective through volunteering, and around 53% youth volunteers wanted to meet like-minded people. And of course, COVID-19 itself became a very strong reason for majority of the respondents to opt for volunteering. And also we received that a majority believes that volunteering gives them a chance to explore a diverse career prospects. And I would like to include myself in this category here. Talking about skill building, 83% of volunteers believe they have gained skills through volunteering. We focused on some of the key 21st century skills that can be obtained through volunteering, such as problem solving, critical thinking, communication and collaboration, creativity and innovation, ICT, cross-cultural skills, and entrepreneurial mindset. Results show that communication, collaboration skills, critical thinking, and problem solving skills are some of the most popular skills obtained. And while we were hoping that majority would also opt for online volunteering as a tool to gain maximum skills, but unfortunately the responses were low, which was also surprising for the team. And majority of these also believe that skills also help them to adapt to their personal environment, personal and professional environment more easily, and also helps in them managing teams. So we were also looking at that most of them were actually in the roles of leadership here. Talking about youth action, the majority of volunteers took the role of a team coordinator, researcher, and a teacher. And 73.5% of volunteers were in fact involved in spreading awareness of COVID-19 and the safety protocols, followed by 49.2% engaged in distribution of relief materials. And this is an interesting part. Around 270 young volunteers were leading their initiatives in response to COVID-19. And out of these, 90 respondents were females. However, we observed through their responses that that they do feel a bit demotivated in the long run, as the reasons being lack of monetary benefits, inability to engage supporters for long, and a general low awareness on the value and benefits of being a social entrepreneur. So somewhere, one of our key recommendations will focus on this particular area as well. And also the least common volunteering roles were observed as volunteers having professional degrees or background, which have a very specific role attached. So unfortunately, even till now, any action that requires skills and professional training, their volunteers were less relied upon. And especially we feel that because of the lack of skill training mechanisms provided by the volunteering organization, this can be the one of the possible reasons. Now, talking about mental health, this was again a very vast area. All of these objectives we've touched upon a little bit, because we know all these objectives, they can be separate studies as well. And now talking about mental health of the volunteers, 18% of male volunteers and 12% female volunteers felt agitated, restlessness during their volunteer work. Amongst the male volunteers, 37 faced a traumatic situation, while 40% of the female volunteers faced trauma. And 48% of the respondents also believe that they have noticed change in their eating habits. But on a large proportion of the youth volunteers were happy and felt a sense of accomplishment, and most were willing to be part of the future volunteering programs and initiatives. Now, talking about the barriers, the main barriers to volunteering were low allowances, to no allowances for travel and food, followed by the need to recognize the volunteers' work. And interestingly, 81.6% of respondents confirmed to not be ensured of safety or security measures, which also demonstrates the attention it is required by the government bodies and the local and international organizations for adoption of necessary policies regarding the same. Also, one of the major barriers being uncertain about their future prospects that could derive from their volunteering roles. So now talking about the pandemic preparedness, now the most challenging areas which the youth volunteering organizations and the youth volunteers found were mitigating the impacts of employment, education, and mental health, with mental health again receiving highest responses. And 78.1% of volunteers confirmed their organization took their suggestions in planning to combat the pandemic at their workplace. So moving on to the analysis, our results reveal that COVID-19 has made a significant impact on the way of thinking and attitudes towards volunteering. Prevalence, symptoms of insomnia is a concern, and needs mitigation. Volunteering during pandemic has contributed to skill development, but again, a rethinking is required for making such programs more useful. And youth taking action with an entrepreneurial spirit in response to COVID-19 needs to be supported. And again, we feel that youth leveraged volunteering as a tool for career exploration and to build interpersonal relationships. Okay.
Thank you so much, Shivangi. We're bit running out of time. I would like to stop you here. Is that okay? Thank you so much, Shivangi, for your wonderful presentation. Before I move to the next session, I'd like to request all the participants to kindly leave your questions in the chat box. You can write there, and I would like to, I will get back to all our presenters with the questions. Thanks once again to Shivangi for your wonderful presentations. Now our next presentation is from the Pakistan, Fiz Fatima YAR team Pakistan. They will be presenting on ramification of COVID-19 on the professional lives of women in Pakistan. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chandra. Hello, everyone. I am Fiza Fatma, and I'm honored to represent Pakistan Team A. So our research topic is actually working from home during COVID-19, a study exploring experiences of women who work in Pakistan. Next slide. So our team consists of 6 women belonging to Pakistan. So we are all based in Pakistan, but in different provinces. Next slide. Okay, so as we all know that when WHO declared COVID-19 as a pandemic, lockdowns were implemented in most countries. So in Pakistan in March, lockdown was implemented across all cities, which led to the closure of educational institutions and workplaces as well. That led to an abrupt shift to online teaching and work from home. So it was very important to note that what impact such an abrupt change have had on people, especially because of a change to work from home. And considering that the gender discrimination and gender inequality have long been a part of our country, and considering that Pakistan ranks at second last position in the world on the global gender index, it was very important to see how pandemic have played out to impact the experiences of women who shifted to online work, online mode of work. Next slide. So we identified 3 key objectives for our research. We wanted to know what kind of experiences were faced by women employed in both public and private sector due to the shift to virtual home-based work in lieu of the pandemic. So our objective number one was that we wanted to know their experiences before and after pandemic that could include positive feedback or challenges. Secondly, we wanted to know the change in their motivation level during pandemic. And lastly, we wanted to know how they have been managing work and their domestic duties likewise. Next slide, please. Okay, so so based on the existing literature review and the research conducted to find out the experiences of women working in Pakistan, we found out that there has been a disproportionate increase in women's unpaid care work and increased cases of stress, anxiety, and exposure to violence during pandemic when the lockdown was imposed. The double burden of women was identified to be increased. While the men of the house continued to work as same as before. However, our research uncovered many other factors as well that indicated uncovered many other factors contributing to the experiences that I will cover up in the next slide. Next slide, please. So our methodology was a mixed method, and we had a self-administered questionnaire which was circulated online over Google Forms, consisting of open and closed-ended questions. We had a total of 124 responses, and out of which 6 were discarded due to incomplete information. And we had 13 in-depth qualitative follow-up interviews which were conducted on Zoom. And we use Excel-based quantitative and qualitative data to an analysis to find out the research findings. However, the limitation of our research were that, number one, our research responses were relatively low, 124, which could not really come up with a generalized findings for the entire country. Secondly, the survey was both the survey and interview were conducted online. That meant that it left out a huge population who do not actually have access to internet or to electronic appliances. Third was a language barrier. All our survey and interview were conducted in English. That meant that people who are not fluent in English and do not understand English had no access to our survey. So that was the limitation of our survey. And secondly, most of the survey responses were originated from only 2 provinces of Pakistan, excluding 2 big provinces that are Balochistan and Gilgit-Baltistan. Next slide, please. Okay, so our key findings suggested that 85% of women suffered disruption in their daily routine and disruption in their personal life. And among the key challenges of working from home, it was noted that 57% of women had disruption at home because they were not able to concentrate on their work as well as take care of their family members, take care of the house chores. And considering that due to pandemic, everything was closed down. So even the housemates were not able to come and work for housemaid servants were not able to come and work for them. So every duty was on the shoulders of the women. It was also noted that there was a disrupted work-life balance, which was because of the irregular working hours. Next slide, please. Okay, so the reason that most of the women indicated that they had disrupted work-life balance was because of the irregular working hours, which were noted to be the highest recorded reason. It was because before pandemic, they would work 9 to 5 at their office, but after the pandemic, they were expected to be online and available for meetings beyond those hours. And because the only medium was through online ways, even online platforms like WhatsApp, Facebook were used to communicate with the managers and with the employees. That sort of blurred the lines between personal life and private life, personal life and professional life, and that led to a double burden as well, because it stretched their working hours, and they were also expected to work and take care of their household. One of the members who we interviewed indicated that she had to take online Zoom meetings as well, and also look at the stove, also look at the stove, and also see who is on the door, and also check on her kids. So there were like a lot of things that they had to juggle at the same time. So because of these reasons, that led to other factors as well, which were irregular sleep schedule, lack of time management, increased workload. However, it is important to also note that a minority of women indicated that they were happy with work from home and they would not like to shift back to the offices because they were able to spend some quality time with family, and because they did not have to travel long hours to their office place. So this is also need to be kept in mind. Next slide, please. Another key aspect that we found was the motivation and stress levels across the public and private sector. Upon asking the respondent that whether their motivation level were decreased, people from the public sector said 52% of the women said that yes, their motivation levels were decreased, while 45% of people in the private sector said that their stress levels were indeed decreased. Upon asking the stress level for the private sector, we see a stark difference between private and public sector, because in the private sector, 64% of the respondents said that their stress level were increased, while only 33% of the respondents belonging to the public sector said that they have their stress increased, while 38% said that they did not have their stress levels increased. This was because in the public sector, which in Pakistan, which mainly consists of government offices, it's not very much automated yet. So most of the work is still done on paper and documented that way. So that is why when the lockdown was imposed, they were not working from work from home. They were not working at all. And even if at places where there were automation, where there were computers, they did not have their personal computers. A brand manager from Karachi shared her experience, and she said she was a senior manager and only she had the laptop, whereas all the employees below her did not have access to the personal laptops, because everything was all the computer and desktop were stationed at the office. So all the work was eventually put on those people who had their personal laptops, while people who did not have their personal appliances were either laid off or were given indefinite break. So that is why we can sort of correlate that there people in the public sector did not face much difficulties, while in the private sector there are small enterprises and privately owned companies that were swift enough to shift to the online mode of working, and thus increasing the stress levels of women. Next slide, please. So we asked all our respondents about various ways they were trying to cope up with this new normal, and some of the recommendations were given, and those included self-care, fixed working hours, taking healthy breaks, time management, providing resources to employees, and others. Next slide, please. So we have 3 recommendations, and we propose that companies, especially private sector organizations, arrange mental health sessions for women by collaborating with mental health organizations addressing the importance of physical and mental well-being. Secondly, all companies, including corporation, NGOs, industries, business, and startups, should effectively implement work from home management strategies by developing organization policies and guidelines to promote work-life boundaries. The policy should mandate fixed working hours for all employees working from home. Companies should also encourage employers to streamline the process of strictly recording their work of hours so that no one is at disadvantage.
Thank you so much, Faiza. That was really very informative and resourceful presentation. And I have to say that it really reflects the reality of Pakistani women very well. Thank you once again. Now we would like to move to our last but not the least presenter from the YAR Team Philippines, Ms. Pauline Mandrela. She will be presenting on youth leaders' response to COVID-19, the case of Sangguniang Kabantan in the Philippines. Over to you, Pauline. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Chandra. So good afternoon from the Philippines. I am Pauline Jane Mandrilla, and I will be presenting our study on behalf of the RPH team. So our research is about the response of the youth leaders to the pandemic, specifically the government-mandated Youth Council of the Philippines, the Sangguniang Kabataan. So next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, so the YAR-PH consists of researchers from different professional and academic backgrounds, ranging first from social sciences to engineering and the academe. So next slide, please. Okay, so let us proceed to the background of our research. Our research focuses on the Sangguniang Kabataan. The Sangguniang Kabataan, also known as the SK, is the institutionalized government-mandated youth council in the Philippines. This consists of youth leaders from ages 18 to 24 as ratified by the SK Reform Act of 2015. So the Sangguniang Kabataan is the government's approach to empowering the youth by utilizing the youth as a viable source of leadership. So they are tasked with implementing programs, projects, and activities that are anchored to the 9 centers of youth participation in the Philippine Youth Development Plan, and one of which is health. So they are also expected to mainstream disaster risk reduction practices as mandated by law, which in this case may be related to how COVID-19 is naturally viewed as the health disaster that poses risks to the lives of the citizens. So despite the youth being one of the most vulnerable sectors during the pandemic, from employment to mental health to education, the youth have remained active in participating in the society. So next slide, please. Our research aims to look into the measures taken by the Sangguniang Kabataan to address the effects of the pandemic in their respective communities. So as well as the challenges that they have encountered upon its implementation, and also the recommendations that they have. So the findings of our study can be used to benchmark effective practices for pandemic response, also for the foundation of policy development and resiliency programs, as well as to further establish the importance of the youth involvement in nation building, especially and specifically the SK. So next slide, please. Okay, so upon the collection of our data, we have conducted initial mapping for the prospect collaborators in order to ensure that the data that we have obtained is well distributed throughout the archipelago of the Philippines. So we have sent out communication letters to the SK presidents securing their consent as we administer the online survey through Google Forms. Then we sent letters inviting them for collaboration and one-on-one interview, which transcription was analyzed thematically. So we limited the projects that the collaborators could feature into 2 per presidents. So in totality, we have collaborated with 23 SK presidents and featured 44 projects. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, as seen in this graph, majority of the projects launched by the Sangguniang Kabataan focused on public health, followed by food security, and then education. So the following were actually done through information campaigns, which is actually the most accessible way in order to participate actively during the pandemic despite the quarantine restrictions. So this includes spreading awareness on COVID-19, the quarantine protocols and within their municipalities, and also information about vaccines. So followed by distribution of relief goods, which includes food and hygiene kits, programs for the vulnerable, which cater to the frontliners, senior citizens, and an unemployed sector, and online activities and seminar, and lastly, environmental management. So actually, regardless of the community quarantine in the respective communities, the projects launched by the Sangguniang Kabataan are mostly based on the needs of their communities. So on the onset of the pandemic last March 2020, majority of the projects done were based on public health, which includes distribution of face masks, face shields, which is actually required in our country, and hygiene kits. And during those times, our country was having problems with the supply of the face masks. It's either there's no supply or the price have reached a point to which some of the citizens could not afford. So in response to this, right within the first week of the onset of the pandemic, some of the SKs have already started creating cloth masks in replacement with this surgical mask as the NDIY face shield to supply their citizens. One example of this is the Sangguniang Kabataan in Visayas, which initially planned to distribute 2,000 cloth masks. But due to the demand and the increasing support that they have received, they were able to generate 10,000 cloth masks and 160 PPEs for their hospitals frontliners. And another case where the SK have implemented data-driven decisions based on the needs of their community. was when projects for mental health were launched, when the number of the cases of the suicidal youth increased in Visayas within their municipality. So they got this data from their own city health office. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so as seen in this graph, the SK mostly encountered challenges relative to budget and mobility. In most cases, the SK addressed these challenges through partnerships and donations from private organizations, and also fundraising activities. Some of the SKs have started their projects from their own money, from their own personal money. One SK that created the face mask, the one I mentioned earlier, continued their project by collaborating with schools, where the volunteers stayed in the schools for a month without going out, and their citizens would hand them food and monetary donations. So this initiative actually rippled through their community, which paved the way to more partnerships and also funds from private organizations. Some SKs also did their own fundraising activities, one of which sold T-shirts. And this actually paved way for their own Sangguniang Kabataan Federation to be financially independent. So, as seen here, only 45% of the SKs that we had collaborated with had partnerships with private organizations. Yet it is evident that it is the leading recommendation. So I am quoting one of the SK presidents here who said, "If only I knew who to tap and who to contact during that time, the project that I have launched could have been launched more smoothly." So stressing out the importance of partnerships during the pandemic here. So majority of the SKs who also mentioned that they will be focusing on vaccination campaigns for their next projects due to the alarming number of people in their municipalities who don't want to get vaccinated. This is actually followed by livelihood and employment opportunities, since the unemployment rate skyrocketed this pandemic. So next slide, please. Okay, now we're down to our recommendations. As they say, it actually takes a village to raise a youth, and it takes one empowered youth to ripple good governance. Therefore, it is recommended that the following stakeholders are present in the journey map of the making of an SK leader. So presently, the Sangguniang Kabataan is only required to have 1 day of mandatory training. However, therefore we recommend that the national government and the LGUs amend policies in order to improve the financial planning and management skills of the SK. This series of workshops and trainings on the following skills presented on the screen, from entrepreneurial, fiscal and project management, partnerships, YAR, crisis management, and digital literacy. So we actually recommend that we have a series of training for that to improve their leadership capabilities. They can also conduct seminars and conferences that could increase the network of the youth leaders, also encouraging the collaboration between public and private sectors. So next slide, please. Okay, it is also recommended that the national government would institutionalize and an incentive program for best-led PPAs, or projects, programs, and activities done by the SK to encourage project sustainability and innovation. And lastly, it is recommended that the national and local government forge partnerships with higher education to regularly conduct research and documentations for youth-led disaster response, wherein the output could pave way to develop improved practices and also serve as resource for policy development. So thank you very much for listening. This is Pauline Manrilia from the Philippines.
Thank you so much, Pauline, for this so resourceful and informative presentation from your group. It was really helpful, I guess, for other presenters, for other YAR team members to know, along with their own country or own regions informations. Also, it's really good to know other regions, other sub-regions informations as well. So thanks, Pauline. And I also would like to thank all the other presenters, YAR members, for joining us today and sharing your research studies with us. Now we would like to move to we are actually at the very end of our session. Now I'd like to request once again Adam and Lala for their last comments to our last three presenters on their research work. First, I would like to request Adam.
Okay, thank you so much to all the presenters for those last three presentations. So let's just get right into it. So I think, first of all, just echoing my sentiments from earlier, I think that once again, in these presentations, it's really important to surface the experiences of young people and to make their voices heard. But also I think in the research design, where possible, to make it as participatory as possible. It would be great to hear those stories. But let me just jump right into the presentation, starting with the South Asia team. Again, great presentation, really, really clear. First of all, areas of potential improvement. I think when we design a research program, I think it's a good idea to be sometimes a bit more narrow in terms of our objectives, you know, so that we can really gain a deeper understanding of a particular issue rather than trying to cover everything. I felt like maybe 6 objectives was too much for your team. You know, you could sort of do everything pretty well, but nothing too deep. So we end up with a relatively surface level understanding of the issues. Just a comment. I think that, again, one of the key research questions that you had was around skills that young people had learned by volunteering. And you focused on 21st century skills, which I think is it's a smart move, because you're trying to make a strong case for investing more in volunteering as a way to build skills that are relevant to you know, to life on this planet, but also to getting a job potentially. Again, would love to hear stories of young people who learned skills and then went on to do things with those skills to make that case really strong. I would also say, you know what it is, like the key finding from your research that stuck with me was that 37% of participants in volunteering had experienced trauma or a traumatic event from doing volunteering. Like, for people who work in volunteering, that might be expected, but I didn't expect it. And I don't think the general public expects that young people volunteering, providing a social service, are coming away traumatized by that experience. Now, trauma is extremely sensitive, and people are not often we're not always best placed to acknowledge whether we are experiencing trauma. What is a traumatic event? Was it the research itself that led to me experiencing trauma, or was it COVID? These are complex, sensitive issues. And again, because mental health is so out there as a prominent issue, often we expose our lack of understanding about mental health and we make assumptions, right? And so I wonder, for me, for your team, that's the question that I would want to explore in more detail, which is, young people who are volunteering are traumatized. We need to change the way we volunteer. Like, or we need some sort of action to address this. Because if I was just, if I was, say, one of the stakeholders you recommended to start investing in youth volunteering, I'd be extremely worried about doing it, considering it seems to do more harm than good. So again, that was the standout figure. And again, if I was making that presentation, I would say 37% of young people experiencing trauma from volunteering. That is headline news, okay? So choose which outcomes from the research you really focus on and hammer home. So now what's next? Use it to justify your next step in your research journey. I've got to hurry up. Pakistan, really good presentation. Really like the fact that you included in-depth interviews alongside survey data. I like the fact that you recognize the limitations in the data that you collected. Interesting that I found one of the fascinating insights from your presentation was public sector workers felt less stressed because they didn't have tech, so they couldn't work in the first place. So they're not even working from home. But you said quite casually, that means they're either fired or they're on a break. I was like, my goodness. I mean, the case for access to technology, that you lose your job in a pandemic like that because you don't have a computer, shocking statistics, shocking fact that I want to learn more about. You know, that's my next step. My goodness, the public sector needs more access to technology. And lastly, I'm going as fast as I can. Philippines team, excellent presentation, really articulate and beautiful graphics. I think that there's always an ethical consideration when you are evaluating your own program yourself. and you are making recommendations that are going to benefit you and your organization, especially an organization that is national, connected to the government, and has so many presidents and such wide reach and scope. Like, I think when you're presenting research on yourself, you need to be a bit conscious of that and maybe acknowledge it. And it felt like a self-evaluation, or it felt almost like a pitch to me, a pitch for funding, a pitch for training. I don't know if you want the Philippines government to be training you on how to be entrepreneurial. I certainly wouldn't want my government teaching me how to be entrepreneurial. I wonder what other options might be to help build those entrepreneurial skill sets. And again, I would love to see more demographic breakdown. Again, we must stop lumping all young people into one homogenous group. You actually have an organization and a setup that knows how to attract funding from private sector organizations. You are well set up to take your research to the next level and start surfacing insights about young people across the Philippines, not just in your organization. So you have tremendous potential, Pauline, and would love to see what you do on the back of this. And I will stop. Thank you so much. We can speak again after this session.
Really, important. You have raised all the important points. I'll quickly move to Lala, and the floor is yours, Lala.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chandra. And since I will not be able to join the Hangout session like Adam, so perhaps I'll just go as comprehensively as possible while keeping my views concise. So first, I'd like to start with Shivangi's presentation. I think it's very interesting when we talk about volunteerism and 21st century skills, and I think I'm happy to highlight that that's actually one of the priorities of ASEAN, or Southeast Asian Association, in terms of youth development. So how to develop skills as school to work transition, not only from internship but also from volunteerism, and that's actually the highlight of the recommendation that you can consider to provide like sort of like an angle. And also maybe there's also a need to perhaps specify or narrow down the definition of volunteerism itself, because when it comes to volunteering, some people stays in an organization for quite some time, some only do spend some hours of their time within a week to do volunteer work. So that's really something that perhaps the report of the research can address more, to be more specific on what kind of volunteering is being addressed there. And also regarding the trauma, the point that Adam raised, that's actually a valid one. And maybe I'm not sure whether it works. It depends on the more details on the data that you have collected. Perhaps if we can put narratives on saying that okay, they experienced trauma, but at the same time it might be something, volunteerism can be something that helps the youth to foster adaptability and resilience, like their ability to face unexpected circumstances, all those things that happen on the ground. That's something that perhaps you can use to create a narratives or recommendations based on those findings that will be constructive when it comes to developing more or advancing cooperation in volunteerism. And secondly, for FISA and also Pauline from the Philippines, I think I'm glad that I left this comment hanging in the first session, because what I would like to raise is actually the public-private partnership approach. And indeed, Kiza's presentation really represents the how COVID has impacted the business sector, especially young people who are working as entrepreneurs, working in the private sector or gig economy. That's really something that's an overarching issue when it comes to addressing how COVID-19 has impacted the private sector. And actually, we need to keep the balance between interpreting the data when you're trying to create stories on your findings from the gaps between the public and private sector. And I think you need to perhaps look deeper into the findings and see what kind of recommendations you can convey from there. Just one more point, Chandra. Regarding the Philippines, yeah, Sangguniang Kabataan is actually a good model that we're pretty familiar with in Southeast Asia for youth engagement. And indeed, for entrepreneurial skills, I think back to the first session, there's statements in the first presentation saying that some students will take gap year. And I think the gap year should be invested for school to work transition. So not only for internship, but also to develop skills, entrepreneurial skills. And most importantly, young people needs to look more into the social entrepreneurship parts, because when it comes to public-private partnership, there's a need to align, the how the core business of the social enterprises and also the private sector in general, how they can respond to the needs of the communities and especially for socioeconomic environmental development. So I think those will be my comments, just to give you some more angles for you to enhance your recommendations. That's it from me. Thank you, Chandra.
Thank you so much, Lala and Adam, and also Belinda. She has to leave us for another promise. But thank you so much, three of you, for your time and joining us today and giving opinions to our young experts, our young researchers on their research, and embracing the thing that the youth are the part of the solutions, and also believing in the thing that by youth, for youth, and with youth. And this UNESCO's initiative, the YAR program, I believe that this is an amazing platform to which has enabled the youth to document and voice their perspectives on the impact of a pandemic, particularly to identify actionable policy recommendations to improve youth perspectives, prospects, and to engage with the policy makers in their respective countries, and also in the global level, and in crafting effective respect to the crisis. Thank you so much, all our respective technical experts, and especially our young researchers. I'd like to name Salwa, Yurine, Astitu, Shibangi, Faiza, and also Pauline. Let's give them a big round of applause for their hard work, and we really appreciate your hard work and for sharing your research studies with all of us. And for our audience, we are really, really very sorry that because we are running out of time, we have to leave now. But your questions have already we have already shared with our presenters, and our expert teams, they already saw it, and some of them are really kind. They already answered that as well. And all the audience, ladies and gentlemen, don't forget to join our other global, sub-regional, and regional sessions that are happening today and tomorrow. We will be having both knowledge session and the research to action. Don't forget to join all the sessions, and also to the hangout sessions. I believe that you will have a lot of fun there. We will be able to learn a lot of things, and let's embrace youth's perspectives to solve the global problems, and also building a sustainable societies with youth, for youth, and let's see through the lens of youth. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Bye-bye. Take care.